The world, when I say with Vietnam, I was like, who am I? Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. And I was going to say, for Paul, my guest, say, good morning, Vietnam. There you go. So I have to say it for you, Paul. Welcome, Paul.
Welcome, although it's not morning in Vietnam, but it's morning somewhere.
You're destroying the charade. Is the charade? Well, as usual, God. And I listen. I have to tell my guests what time is it there? 1 o'clock in the morning? 2 o'clock in the
No,
morning?
no, it's 4 o'clock now. It's semi-reasonable instead of completely unreasonable.
4 o'clock, 4 a.m. and Paul is wearing a tie. I mean, that's dedication, absolute dedication. Anyway, thank you,
I
Mr.
thought you were
Jacob.
going to give me a hard time about no jacket.
Well, listen, if you're going to do it, you might as well do it right. I mean, listen, you're 50-50 right now, but I'm just trying to make you feel good for being up at 4 o'clock in the morning. So as best I can. And Rhonda, if you're listening, which I'm sure you're not because you're sleeping, and Rhonda's his wife. Rhonda, just so you know, I appreciate you letting Paul be on the show at 4 o'clock in the morning. So there you go. There's my shout out to Rhonda. So let's get started here. Paul, you're always great to be on the show, and because you definitely have a handle on what's going on around the world. And so before we get to the global issues in China, which was in my monologue, I got two U.S. domestic issues to talk to you about because they do have an impact in the world. First, what the hell is going on with the New York mayor's race? Tell me.
Well, Zoran Mamdani is a very good candidate, I think. Very good speaker, talking about issues that matter to people. We got to get cheaper food. We got to do this and that. What has propelled him, I think, is the fact that he's running against Eric Adams now, who is very, very weak, who was indicted, but then they withdrew the indictment because he was willing to play ball with the administration. And of course he beat Cuomo, and all you hear in the U.S. is it's a shocking victory. But Cuomo left public life in disgrace, and I don't know why he came back. I mean, not just all kinds of allegations of sexual harassment and different, bad, weird behavior, but also his whole COVID, response, which was lauded at the time, ended up being seen. And look, we can all make mistakes, but was seen as just disastrous, sending COVID people into nursing homes and so on and so on. So, Mondami has run against, Cuomo, who's weakened, and now is running against Eric Adams, who's weakened in the, arguably one of the most liberal cities in the country. Probably San Francisco's a little bit more liberal, and there's probably a small town here or there that is. But his solution to things is for the government to go into the grocery business. And, I mean, it really starts to make you wonder, now, where is that line between socialism and communism? Because he's all over it. And it's not good for the Democratic Party, which I think has gotten whooped in the last election because they went way far to the left. I'm pointing to the right, but they went way far to the left, and I think are having a hard time finding their way back.
Yeah, well, just so you know, on the screen looks left, so just want you to know, the
Oh,
answer
there we
for you.
go.
Yeah, yeah, because you're. But let me. He is a Democrat, and Eric Adams is a Republican, correct? Right?
No, Eric
No,
Adams, I think,
no.
will run as an independent. And now
Now,
in New York is one of the few places in the United States of America where you can have multiple lines. You could be on the ballot on under Republican and under Independent and under Conservative Party, and you could be. In fact, Cuomo is still on the ballot under some other party. I can't recall it at the moment, but some other small party label. And I think they're pushing him to get out. But I think Cuomo staying in would help Mondani, because Cuomo would likely split some of the vote with Adams. It's interesting that the Democratic Socialist, the savior of the poor, and someone who recently points out on his website that a neighborhood that would be higher taxed is whiter, as if that's kind of, I thought it was all economic, but anyway, but he is he's a democratic socialist. I think he has gotten to a point now where he could get beat in this race, just because he's out there enough that, and his main voting bloc, his best voting bloc, is white people over $100,000. So here is the champion of the poor, but he lost to Cuomo among the poor, and he won the richest segment of the population and the whitest segment of the population. Very
Well, it's going to be
interesting.
interesting. It is going to be an interesting race, and what happens in New York? New York politics really is kind of, in some ways, a bellwether in many ways around what's happening in the U.S. I would argue, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wanted to bring it up because well, first of all, there are a lot of internationals in New York City, whether they're
Yes.
Nigerians or Asians or whatever. So it does have an impact on our audience around the world, so that's important. But
There's
when is the general election, or when will the election be?
the local election like New York, I don't think it falls on, I don't believe it's this November, but it could be. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. Sometimes they fall. I know Chicago always is like at some weird time in February or something, and these big city mayor races matter, and in part I think because obviously because of the power that they have in a city, which is important, but they are a little bit of a bellwether. And in a city like Chicago, they've sometimes elected a more conservative mayor. Now they're on a streak electing very liberal mayors, but New York's the same way. I mean, you had Bloomberg, who ran as a Republican. You've had some, Mayor Koch was a Democrat, but was always kind of seen at one election. And of course, I'm dating myself. This is decades ago, but he had the Republican line, the Democratic line, and an independent line.
Okay. Well, listen. Well, I would love to talk more about it maybe on the future show when I can convince you to get up again. We'll talk about it. But let's switch gears here because I really want to, because internationally. So there's this talk, and I have my opinion. You and I have talked about it. So there's this talk about what Trump did in bombing Iran, okay, and the nuclear facilities. And then I read this, I think this op-ed or something, where people say that it's somehow going to give China a pause and change China's outlook on Taiwan. Now, you know my opinion about that. And before I weigh in on that, let me get your thoughts on it. Do you think that what happened in Iran will or should have an impact on Chinese thinking?
It has an impact because the U.S. took action, and it was a military action, and it says, oh, Trump will engage and will take military actions overseas. And it was supposedly, I think, a big split between in MAGA world. It was one half said, no, we're isolationists. And the other half said, no, let's go do it, whatever Donald Trump says. That's not really how MAGA world works, or how the conservative side of politics works. And I think there's almost unanimity in the U.S. and around the world. I suspect there's a lot of support. If you say, hey, do you want Iran to have a nuke? The answer is no. Do you want someone to take it out? Yes, please, carefully, safely, without too much damage, uh, perfectly, obliterated. But so that's where I think people are, and so I don't think it was. I don't think it shows that Trump's kind of always on the war path. I don't think it sends any huge signal to China, but I think the last administration said talked a good line against China, and it helped. They kept a lot of what Trump had done. The U.S. has turned. We realize that China is not our friend. At least most of us do now, and so I think that in totality has started to make a difference. But after Afghanistan, any sort of U.S. and the disastrous pullout there, any sort of U.S. move that looks strong and competent is helpful against China. It's just be silly to overstate it. They can count. They can have maps. we have to show we can counter their invasion of Taiwan. And the best thing coming out of the Trump administration, in my mind, is this leaked memo. And of course, I'm sure they're the ones who leaked it. But it basically said the sole pacing threat that the U.S. military is trying to counter is an invasion of Taiwan from China across the strait, and that sets us in the right place, I think. And I think China's probably a little bit happy that we're having to deal with Iran and having to deal with Gaza and having to deal with the Middle East. And I think the one to take just a moment out, well, I'll finish the thought. China's happy about that. They're not happy that we're getting to show that we've got some military might, and it does send a message. So I think it is a good thing in terms of they can see the U.S. can act.
Well,
It's a bad thing in terms of us being sucked into the Middle East. And my one little caveat to all this, or not caveat, but just a side point is a lot of Americans would like to pull out of the Middle East. We broke it in part with everything that we've done, and we need to be there to make it to solve it. And it's not something that, oh, we can just go in and we spend a couple days and get a deal and then the Middle East is solved. But I do think that we have to take some responsibility for the mess, and the mess with Iran goes back to 1953 and it's not really just with Israel. It's also with the fact that U.S. foreign policy has done some things that frankly I'm not proud of in Iran. Now, it was
no,
before I
no,
was born, but I just want for the record.
because you're a young chicken. But no, I agree. Listen, I did a conference not too long ago, and a lady stood up in the audience and said, "Shameful U.S. foreign policy," and she's talking about the 50s and the 60s. I said, "Yes, listen, there's a lot of things our country has done that I'm not proud of. But foreign policy, number one, is not black and white. I mean,
Right,
it
right,
really is not, and we all have to remember that. But I like to deal, and I said, listen, let's just deal with the current issues, and we can't go back and change what happened in the 50s and 60s and 70s. But I agree with you. I mean, it goes back to putting the Shah of Iran, supporting the
right,
Shah. I mean, and there's also, to be fair, there's always two sides to every foreign policy debate. There's no doubt about it. As I said, it's not
right,
black and white.
right.
But what I want to say is, and then we'll come back to the Middle East, but my perception of Trump and military action. I mean, it's one thing about the memo that says, I mean, I think we pretty much all agree that one of the greatest military threats, well, first of all, I don't necessarily agree that the greatest military threat to the world is China's action against Taiwan. I would argue with what Russia is doing in Europe. I mean, that's what I would argue because it has greater repercussions. Because if China takes Taiwan, to me, that's a one-time action. They're going to take Taiwan, say they're unified, great and wonderful, and it'll be over. Russia taking Ukraine is going to have European impact. They're going to take Moldova, Georgia, then who knows if they're going to go in the Balkans or the Baltics, and that could spread and all that kind of stuff. So I would disagree with that simple analysis. That is the greatest military threat. However, if you look at Trump, what has he done militarily? Yes, he took out the general in his first administration, the Iranian general in the first administration. He has definitely bombed the nuclear bunkers, okay? But he has refused to go against Russia. And my opinion is that he, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this. I know it, so I'm just going to go ahead and brace myself for this. I'm going to go ahead and brace myself for this. That
No one
he's
ever
acting like,
stops at that point, but go ahead.
I know. It's easy to pick on the little guy. Not to say Iran's a
Yeah,
little guy, because Iran is bad, evil, and they should never have a nuke. Make it very clear, it's wrong. They should not have a nuke. They need to be destroyed. I get it. However, it's easy for the U.S. military to drop bunker busters from 30,000 feet in the air and take on a country that can't militarily take you on, just like when they killed Soleimani, the Iranian general, just like the U.S. Went after Grenada or went after
right.
all these little small conflicts. And Afghanistan's a different story, but you think you're just taking on the Taliban. We had to do that.
And
I
and
find it
part,
very difficult. Go ahead.
I was just going to
Go
say,
ahead.
and part of this is Israel taking out their air defenses, which made it a lot easier.
Of course, yeah. It's easy for us to say, okay, and I think if we had the capability of giving them the bomb and dropping it, they would. But only just to be very clear, so the audience understands, the reason we drop the bombs in Iran is because we have the only flights capable of dropping such a heavy bomb. So that's why we did
Yeah.
it. Um, so the reality is, my argument is, when it goes to China, because people are writing, oh, China's going to think twice about attacking Taiwan because of what the military action. I don't see Donald Trump, and I hope I am wrong. Be very clear about this. I don't see Donald Trump committing troops to fight a military that could have an impact on us. I just don't see it. And I want to take that one little step further because, and also China is starting to act a little differently. It used to be that Russia was the rogue actors who would go out there and assassinate and kill people. But recently, I think China has stepped up their game because there's news stories about them trying to actually assassinate the vice president
Right.
of Taiwan through some car accident. So they're taking playbook from the Russians. So I think they're dangerous. But I don't know. I would just argue, and not to belabor the
I
point, but I
would
would
I
argue,
would I would say though, Dane, that I mean, if anyone thinks, boy, this backed off China, I think they'd be crazy. Because of course China's, I mean, this is a long term, they want to expand, they want to lead the world, they want to control the world. They're not, they're not going away because, oh, we didn't realize you had a bunker buster. But and I would push back on you too in terms of the reason that what could happen in the strait is so disastrous and so much scarier than the scenario in Europe is that in Europe, you've got all these countries from Poland, Germany, France, there's just a lot of countries with a lot more wealth than Russia has that can push back and that are beginning to really, NATO is the best thing going in terms of world defensive freedom right now is that NATO is starting to feel its oats, and I'm loving that. And I think that's a huge deterrent. The fact that NATO has been energized is a bigger deterrent than what the U.S. did in Iran. That sends a message to China. But the reason China is so much more, I think, dangerous and should be the key threat is that if we lose Taiwan, you've got the chips, which throws the world. I mean, just the attack itself, even if it's repulsed, throws the world into recession. But there's also the geopolitical, the importance strategically, geographically of Taiwan. And I think defending the Philippines becomes extremely difficult if China controls Taiwan. And it just makes the entire all of Asia, which has been adjusting like Europe against the threat of authoritarianism, all of a sudden all bets are off. And really that's the good news this morning at the wee hours here in the United States of America is that in ways that haven't been true in my lifetime, Asian countries are stepping up militarily. Japan, the Philippines, and then Australia is not really an Asian country, but we'll count it anyway. European countries, NATO is stepping up, and this is what provides me a little bit of comfort because, as you and I both know, the authoritarians have been stepping up big time in recent years.
no, no, listen, I agree. I agree. And I don't want to oversimplify it or overcomplicate it. I mean, the reality is, I mean, first of all, so let's go back to something you said. I agree that I don't believe that bombing Iran nuclear sites is going to give China pause. Not at all. I agree with that. And people who think that need to reevaluate because President Xi of China has a plan and just and he he understands that his greatest deterrent is the United States. So I don't think suddenly he's going to recalculate and recalibrate just to become some bombing. So that is going to definitely be the case. But I would disagree on one thing. I don't see, I mean, China wants to be a preeminent player in the world. They want to, their axis of evil or whatever they want to call themselves or whatever axis they want to be part of. The difference between Russia and China is that I think China has a focus on Taiwan. I don't think militarily that they want to expand authoritarianism to any other country. I don't see them going after the Philippines or maybe a few islands with Japan and that kind of stuff. But that's all part of making China what they believe China geographically should be. I think our days of exporting communism and authoritarianism, I think, is over. I don't see that. I don't see that happening. But they do
No,
want to control.
I would argue that one, if you're in the Philippines, you might say, well, yeah, maybe they'll leave us alone, but we can't stick our toe into the West Philippine Sea because China's controls the entire South China Sea or wants to. And of course, if it gets to take Taiwan and if it gets to take the South China Sea, literally 90% of an ocean that it's claiming. Um, where does it stop there? And of course, if you think about it, there have been deaths on the border of China and India in hand-to-hand combat. And when I say hand-to-hand, I mean hand-to-hand. They didn't have guns and stuff. It was rocks and hands and sticks. But there were a bunch of, several dozen Indian people killed. They're taking land in Bhutan. I mean, they're aggressive in a way. Well, I harken back to a call I was on one time where the guy said that unlike the U.S., China's never attacked its neighbors. And of course, I just started to think of, there's Tibet, there's, different things, there's Vietnam where so it's like the truth is, I think they are very aggressive. I think they realize that Taiwan is one, they have a better claim because it's Han Chinese people living there. But it's sort of like Britain saying, well, there's a bunch of English people in America, we claim it. But I think they realize how critically important it is because if they have Taiwan, they're open into the ocean. They can separate Japan and the Philippines. I just think and I think people miss a lot of times that first island chain and how critical Taiwan is as a spoke there. So.
Well, I just want to be very clear. I agree with you 100%. I have zero doubt that there will be military action by China against Taiwan. Zero doubt about that. It's going to happen. And I guess because sadly we got to go here, but I guess I will argue that um, we're just in a period of life in this world where conflict is the norm versus the exception, and that's going to grow. It's going to increase. Listen, I sadly have to leave. It's always great talking to you, Paul. You can now take your tie off and relax, or go out for an early morning dinner party or whatever you want. But next time,
I am scheming to go to Starbucks now because they open at like 4:30 in the morning, and
and you're going to impress them.
they'll
You're going to
wonder
impress.
what I'm doing.
Well, wear your jacket and really impress them. So anyway, I got to take a break. I got to take a break here. Anyway, good talking to you, Paul. Talk to you soon. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be
Thank
back
you.
with our next guest from around the world with Dane Waters. Thank you.